Marcus Garvey is a name so woven into the fabric of black empowerment that it's hard to see where he ends and where the movements he inspired begin. I mean, this is a man who didn't just talk the talk. He walked it, built it, sailed it, literally. You've probably heard of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA for short. Yeah, that was Garvey's baby. Founded way back in 1914, this organization grew into the largest black mass movement of its time, with millions of members from Harlem to Kingston, London to Lagos. Now, when we talk about Garvey, we have to talk about his ventures, because trust me, the man thought big. Let's take the Black Star Line, for example. Picture this: a black-owned fleet of ships connecting businesses and communities across the Americas and eventually to Africa. It was more than just a shipping company. It was a symbol, a call to action for self-reliance and economic independence. Then there was the Negro World newspaper. At its peak, it reached hundreds of thousands across the globe, bringing news, culture, and Garvey's unapologetic push for unity and pride in black identity. This wasn't just a local movement, no. It was global, reaching black communities in every corner of the diaspora. Garvey's philosophy was centered on Pan-Africanism, a belief in the unity and self-determination of all people of African descent. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was a movement. He truly believed in the idea that we should define our future rather than wait for someone else's permission to live it. And this message, well, it transcended borders. It lit fires in the hearts of leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and even Nelson Mandela. I mean, imagine inspiring not one but three monumental figures in civil rights history. That's Garvey's gravity, his influence. And, the way Garvey connected communities, it's stunning to think about. Whether through the UNIA chapters springing up from the Americas to Africa, or through that ambitious vision of repatriation to Africa itself, Garvey forged something bigger than himself. A trailblazer, he laid the groundwork for generations of activism, essentially giving black people across the globe a blueprint for empowerment and pride that lingers even to this day. His legacy is everywhere, but to fully appreciate all he achieved, you need to understand the obstacles he overcame. And we're talking some serious uphill battles here. Okay, so let's talk about the 1923 conviction. This is where things get honestly infuriating. Marcus Garvey, this larger-than-life figure of empowerment, was brought down by an empty envelope. Yeah, you heard that right, an empty envelope. That was the so-called key piece of evidence in his mail fraud conviction. Nothing inside it, no clear connection to criminal intent, just an envelope. It's almost laughable if it weren't so tragic. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about the envelope. The trial itself was, let's just say, questionable at best. First, the prosecutorial misconduct. There's strong evidence that key witnesses were, coached. And no, not like in a helpful mentor sort of way. I mean coached to lie, to twist facts, to make the case against Garvey stick. One of the main witnesses admitted later on that they committed perjury. You've got a young 19-year-old essentially manipulated into giving false testimony. That's not justice, that's a rigged setup. And if that weren't enough, we've got to talk about the judge. This wasn't just any judge presiding over the case. This was a man with openly racist views. Not only did he refuse to recuse himself when his bias was clear as day, but his presence pretty much guaranteed that Garvey wasn't getting a fair trial. Imagine going into court knowing the system is set, like 100% against you. But for Garvey, that wasn't new. He was no stranger to fighting uphill battles. Still, this was hostility on a whole other level. And of course, we can't ignore the role of the Bureau of Investigation. This is Hoover's baby we're talking about, which eventually became the FBI. They were actively working to discredit and silence black leaders of the time. And Garvey? Man, he was a massive target. The Bureau basically went out of its way to manufacture a case, using every tool they had to neutralize a man whose only crime was empowering his people. It's systemic racism in its purest form, weaponized through the legal system. And it worked. For a while. Garvey was convicted, sentenced, and ultimately deported. All of it designed to dismantle the movement he built and disrupt the message he carried. But even in the face of all of that, Garvey's spirit didn't crumble, not even close. So fast forward, it's been a century, a full 100 years since Marcus Garvey stood trial in what history has exposed as one of the greatest miscarriages of justice of its time. And now, 2025, comes this long overdue moment, a posthumous pardon issued by President Joe Biden. Think about that for a sec. 101 years to officially recognize that Garvey's conviction wasn't just flawed, it was fundamentally unjust. His name, in the eyes of the law at least, is finally cleared. But let's be honest, his legacy never needed official recognition to shine. The world already knew Marcus Garvey as a hero. The journey to get here wasn't an easy one. People like Congresswoman Yvette Clarke and others carried the torch, pushing for Garvey's exoneration for years, decades even. Clarke's tireless advocacy, alongside the Congressional Black Caucus, was fundamental in making this happen. These efforts are a reminder that the shadows of history don't fade on their own. They have to be brought into the light, intentionally, persistently, and sometimes with a lot of late nights and signed letters to the White House. And then there's Jamaica's role in all of this. The island's relationship with Garvey has always been one of deep respect. I mean, in 1969, he was named Jamaica's first national hero. That's the highest honor the nation can give, a moment that permanently inscribed his name in the country's story. Before that, in 1964, his remains were brought back home and reburied in National Heroes Park in Kingston. Garvey's impact as a champion for Black liberation and pride meant something not just globally, but deeply, personally, to Jamaica. He wasn't just a hero of history. He was our hero. But this pardon isn't just about closing a chapter. It's about what this gesture stands for. In a time where systemic racial injustices are still unraveling, slowly, painstakingly slowly, moments like these ripple outward. Garvey's pardon isn't just about him. It's about every voice that's been silenced by inherent bias in the justice system. It's about validating the movements that have fought and continue to fight against structural inequalities. It's a recognition that the work of civil rights leaders doesn't just happen in the streets or on stages. Sometimes it's stitched together in letters, advocacy, or decades of unrelenting effort. And honestly, doesn't it feel like this is the weight of Garvey's legacy? The idea that no fight, no matter how long it takes, is ever in vain. And, this moment makes me think, what would Garvey himself have said about all of this? I can't help but imagine he would remind us that, while justice delayed isn't ideal, it's still justice. And that, if nothing else, this is a call for us to carry the torch, to keep pushing for all the untold stories, all the other names still waiting for redemption, because every small victory is part of a much bigger picture. And with that thought, we wrap up today's story, both a reflection on Marcus Garvey's towering achievements and a modern redemption worth celebrating. I hope you took something away from this, because, well, I think Marcus Garvey's spirit might say, this journey, it's ours to finish. So until next time, be curious, be kind, and keep thinking big. See you soon.